My name's Dave, and I want to be a game developer. I have ideas for games, can program, and even do modest pixel art. But I lack the know-how to create fun and well-constructed levels. And that fact makes me die a little inside every time I think about it. Well, if I can't create a full game, I might as well have fun building other game elements. I always liked those old Game Boy games that showed a map of the entire game world on the title screen. So here we are. This is the time I created a title screen for a game that doesn't exist. The world for my game will take place in a sea of clouds rather than a sea of stars. So the planet will be a giant sky island. And since that's the case, I'm gonna need a good sky background. Skies and horizons are actually fairly easy to make. Just pick the color you want, fill in the entire image, and lower the sky's saturation the lower you get in the picture. It looked a tad stiff though, so I decided to slant the layers a bit to give it a more rounded look. I had originally intended to make a dark void of nothingness be at the bottom, but I just couldn't get the purple to mesh with blue properly. This turned out to be for the best though, as you'll see later in the video. I've never been good at making rock shapes, so the idea of making a giant one that people actually live on kinda scared me. But it wasn't that bad. I created a circle and used that as a base to mold a rougher shape around it. The layered bottom was surprisingly even easier. I just took the bottom of my little platform, made it go on a diet, and then made a few small edits here and there. Rinse and repeat. After that, it was a matter of coloring everything in. For the vast fields at the top, I drew inspiration from Game Boy Advance titles. Games like the Minish Cap always had this warmth about them due to their rich greens. So, naturally, that's not the color I went with. I remembered visiting the fairy realm of Xanaris in Runescape when I was 13 years old. The blue grass there gave it a really mystical feel, so I decided to give my world a similar feel by going with a bluish green. Unfortunately for this little world, I am far from a benevolent creator. So I poked a massive hole in the center. This will prevent players from just walking through the map and serve as an important area later in the game. The totally not real game. The stage is set, so now it's time to add some locations. I'm a fan of the first area being isolated from the rest of the world. Kokiri Forest from Ocarina of Time and the ruins from Undertale being prime examples. So with that in mind, welcome to Dome, a hollowed-out glacier that houses a snow-covered forest and a race of gnomes. It's within its confines that players will begin their journey. I decided to put it on a sort of sub-island to reinforce that feeling of being cut off from the rest of the world. Plus, it will allow for a transition period from the beginning of the game as the player crosses the bridge to the main field. This next part isn't really an area, but I wanted there to be a drop-off point for the player after exiting Dome. So I created some woods with a clearing in the middle. This will serve to push the player in the right direction. Next on the menu will be the tastiest area, because it'll be food themed. I don't typically enjoy mountain or lava levels, but I had an idea for a race of goblin chefs. So I decided to give them a volcano that contains molten cheese. Near the summit, a plate-like structure supports their hometown of Tableton. I wanted to add tiny little houses on top so it didn't just look like a cloud, but they'd end up being so small they would look like tiny clusters of pixels. So there is a town here, trust me, you're just gonna have to take my word for it.
Okay, I believe you.
Fun fact, I was born on Halloween, so I have a natural love for spooky things. Plus, I love the autumn aesthetic, so I wanted to include one here. This area is still pretty abstract in my mind, but the idea is for a town with a ghost-like race called Spectres with a love for theater. That's all I've got on that so far, but like I said, this game doesn't exist, so there's no harm in leaving it vague. This next area is also kind of abstract, partially due to the fact that I'm not the biggest fan of water areas. But like with Tableton, I had a fun idea that required the terrain. So, on the world's bottom left corner is an ocean with several islands scattered across it. But in its depths, the underwater inhabitants are terrorized by a mermaid mob, or the Murphia for short. I wanted to add a waterfall going off the edge of the world, but I just couldn't get it to look right. And now it's time to actually add a human settlement. I had this neat idea to make a city that resembles a game controller, so why not make the houses look like buttons and the central tower look like a control stick? That's right, a control stick, not the Space Needle. bit small for a city, but if Pokemon can get away with a town having only 2 houses and a lab, I think I can be forgiven for its size. As of right now, this world is pretty filled out with 5 areas, but that's a bit too short of a game for my liking. Fortunately, I have 2 additional areas, one of them being the final area, stored up in my noggin. But they're both obscured from the player's sight, and I can't really talk about why without spoiling anything, so you're just gonna have to take my word for it. This world has 7 areas, I promise.
Okay, I believe you.
Alright, now that the world is finished, it's time to make the final touches. I created a title screen room in GameMaker and added both my background and the world itself. But with the absence of a void below, I needed to add something that would take away some of the blandness. I created several different layers of clouds and tiled them across the room. I darkened them the closer they got to the bottom of the screen to help convey the distance between them and give the illusion that the world is casting a shadow on the clouds beneath it. GameMaker offers a neat little feature where you can make the backgrounds scroll, so that's what I did with my clouds. I like the way it turned out. Makes the screen look less static. Now for the title. I didn't want to use just generic text, but I'm also not well versed in creating fonts, but I think it turned out pretty well overall. After that, I just added a flashing press start prompt and bam, all the imagery is done. Now there's just one more thing. The music. I love music, and I wanted there to be an awesome main theme to play before you jump into the world of the game. I had Pokemon Mystery Dungeon's title theme playing in my head during this entire project. And since I can't make music, I'm just going to use it as an example and hope the Nintendo ninjas don't come after me. With that said, there's only one thing left to do. Feel ready to visit this unnamed world? Well, that's a shame, because this world